For the past several videos, I've talked about point-and-shoot cameras that I purchased as I started out my film photography journey, all of which had fixed lenses. This time around, I wanted to try something different, a point-and-shoot with a zoom. So why would you want a camera like this? Is it as good and as sharp as a fixed lens point-and-shoot? What are its quirks and what alternatives can you consider? Well, stick around to find out. This is the Yashica T Zoom. The Yashica T Zoom, also known as the Kyocera T Zoom or T4 Zoom, is a fully automatic compact camera for 35mm film made by Kyocera and released in 2002. This camera belongs among the popular T series of cameras by Kyocera, which started out as far back as 1985 with the Yashica T AF. Currently, these cameras have become popular alternatives to the much sought after and much more expensive Contax T series of cameras, the most well known of which of course is the Contax T2. The T of course stands for Tessar, an ingeniously simple lens design created in 1902, the design principles of which were used as a model for good performance by succeeding designs like the Vario Tessar. For its case, the Yashica T Zoom sports a Carl Zeiss Vario Tessar 28mm to 70mm lens with the maximum aperture of 4.5 at the wide end and f8 at the telephoto, and it can focus up close to about 0.5 meters or 1.6 feet. It has a programmed electronic shutter that can expose from 2 seconds to 1/360th of a second on the wide end and 2 seconds to 1/250th of a second on the telephoto, and it can even do long exposure of up to 2 minutes. The Yashica T Zoom can read the X code from 50 to 3200 and will default to 100 if it can't read the code or if it doesn't detect any, just like most film cameras of the time. I got this camera on eBay about 3 months ago and I've been testing it out ever since because I wanted to see how different it would be in comparison to a fixed lens point-and-shoot. And normally when we're comparing fixed lenses and zoom lenses, the fixed lens would be objectively sharper, but I would say that the Carl Zeiss lens on this Yashica is still pretty sharp throughout the entire zoom range. Now we go to the boring part of the video where I talk about how to operate this camera. Of course, we have to learn how to turn it on first, and it's as easy as pressing the on-off button on the top of the camera. A little too easy, maybe. I recently placed it in my bag and it got accidentally pressed while in there. Don't know how that happened, but just know that after 2 minutes, the camera does automatically turn off. The Yashica has 2 autofocus modes, a 5-point multi-autofocus mode on the wider focus frame, which is the default mode when you turn on the camera, and a spot autofocus mode on the center focus frame, which you can activate by long pressing the on-off switch when the camera is turned off. To take a shot, not that kind of shot, make sure your subject is within the focus frame, press the shutter halfway, wait for the green LED to light up on the right side of the viewfinder, which will tell you that the camera has achieved focus. You can then reframe if you need to, and fully press down on the shutter to take a photo. If the green LED light is blinking, it means that the camera hasn't achieved focus or the flash is still charging and the shutter won't trip. To control the lens's zoom, there is a zoom rocker on the upper right body of the camera, and it has a pretty cool feature. You can hold it down, which will zoom the lens smoothly, or you can do a single press, which will step up the zoom one focal length at a time, which is quite useful if you want to shoot at a particular focal length. Oh, and the viewfinder zooms as well. Pretty neat. Now, since this camera is fully automatic, it's actually quite easy to load film. Just open the camera back, insert the film at an angle, and pull the leader part up to the film mark on the spool side. Make sure the film is lying flat on the camera and close the camera back. The film will advance automatically and the counter on the display panel should read 1. If it reads 0 and is blinking, this means that the film didn't load correctly, so you'll have to reopen the camera and reload the film. The camera uses a CR123A battery. A battery indicator can be seen on the display panel whether the camera is turned on or off, so you can always check if you need to replace your batteries before heading out for a day of shooting. And this camera weighs in at about 234 grams, pretty easy to put in your backpack or even your jacket or pants pocket, which is my usual go-to. Recently, my good friend AE got married. Congrats, dude. And I brought this camera with me to capture the celebration. It really worked well, and it was quite handy to have a zoom lens around compared to my usual fixed lens point and shoot, as there were definitely scenarios where I couldn't zoom with my feet. So it was pretty convenient to zoom with a zoom. And in general, it's just been a great companion to my Olympus XA3, allowing me to take shots that I wouldn't be able to normally. Now this camera has a bunch of great features that we most likely would take for granted now, seeing as how advanced our phones and our cameras are, but I think for a film camera, these are pretty good to have. On the viewfinder, there is a diopter adjustment so you can fine-tune the image you see through it. And aside from the focus frames I talked about earlier, it also has a close-range area frame. This guide is for use when you're trying to focus less than 1 meter between your subject and the camera, because the viewfinder, which is positioned differently, doesn't exactly see the same thing as your lens. This is what we call as the parallax effect, so make sure to compose properly. The camera also has several exposure and shooting modes, which you can access through these 3 buttons. On the rightmost is the flash select button, which allows you to cycle through the camera's different flash modes. Take note that the last mode, the landscape mode, basically turns off the flash and ensures the lens focuses to infinity, perfect for landscapes or when you're shooting through a window or glass, which could confuse the autofocus. The camera also has a self-timer which can be set with this button on the left. After pressing the shutter, the camera will take a picture after a 10-second delay. A long exposure mode can also be activated by pressing this button twice. You'll see an LT on the display, and pressing the shutter button will activate this mode after a 2-second delay. You can obtain a maximum of 2 minutes for the long exposure, which you can end at any point by pressing the shutter button. The middle button is the exposure mode. One press will do a plus 1.5 exposure compensation, overexposing your image, and another press will do a negative 1.5 exposure compensation and underexpose your image. This camera also has a built-in data back, and it has a bunch of different date formats which you can try. But what I especially liked about this in particular is that the year can be set anywhere from 00 to 99, a feature that not a lot of cameras of that time could do. With the data back on my Minolta Ps, for example, the year can only be set from 87 to 99 and 00 to 19, so I can't set the year 2025 on this camera. This was due to the fact that a lot of manufacturers at that time had to put limitations in their tech in order to keep the mechanism a little bit more simple or to make things a little bit more cost-effective. And finally, when you've taken your last photo, the camera will automatically rewind the film for you and you'll be able to see the counter count down. When the counter reaches 0 and starts blinking, brace yourself for how good your photos are going to be. At this point, it'll be safe to open the camera back and you can finally send your film to your local developing lab. So what are this camera's quirks? Well, the first thing I notice is the viewfinder. It is a little bit small and not as bright. Again, this is me coming from the Olympus XA3, which I think has a really great viewfinder. It's bright and it's easy to compose with. In contrast, the Yashica is a little bit harder to look through, and you have to make sure your eye is at the correct angle or you won't see anything. So it can be a little bit of a struggle sometimes to compose your image. Another thing is the autofocus assist flash, which will partially fire the flash when you half press in order to aid in autofocusing. This is great, of course, because focus, but not so great when you're in a dimly lit space and might actually surprise a bunch of unsuspecting people. The way to get around this is to turn the flash off or use exposure compensation, which also turns off the flash, but this leads me to my next gripe with the camera. The modes don't have memory, just like me most of the time. Well, a lot of the time. So for example, if you turn on exposure compensation or the self-timer and you took a photo or you turned off the camera, the settings will go back to the default. The only settings here that are retained after taking a photo are the flash modes. But again, once you turn off the camera, then it'll go back to the default auto flash setting. Finally, though the camera does have a great zoom range from 28 to 70, on the telephoto end, the aperture is only limited to a maximum of f8, which isn't as good as some zooms out there.
Now, the camera doesn't have any manual focusing capabilities, but the autofocus is pretty fast. I did, however, encounter a few issues with the focusing on some rare occasions, but I think these are attributed mostly to the conditions I was shooting in and also mostly user error. So if any of these things that I mentioned are deal breakers for you, then you might want to consider getting an alternative. Now, there isn't actually a shortage of zoom lens film cameras out there. In fact, there's a whole lot of them, all coming from different manufacturers. Just to name a few, we have the Contax TVS, the Pentax SPO, the Minolta Riva zooms, and the Olympus Stylus zooms. And all of these cameras will have varying zoom ranges, different maximum apertures within those zoom ranges, possibly additional features that you might not find in the other cameras, and of course, the cost. So I've made this handy little table that you guys can go through, focusing on the main specs of some of these popular cameras that might be important to you. Now, I know this isn't an extensive list. There are many more cameras out there, each with their own advantages, disadvantages, their own quirks. But I hope this guide can be a starting point so that you can figure out what your needs are. So what is the Yashica T Zoom perfect for? I think if you want a point and shoot with a lot of versatility, has a decent zoom range, a pretty good premium feel, if you're someone who prefers to zoom with a zoom and not with your feet, like me most of the time, you're willing to compromise on not so fast zoom lens, but still has pretty sharp and clean images all throughout the zoom range, and you would still be able to shoot good low light photos given the right scenario, then yeah, the Yashica will definitely be the point and shoot zoom camera that will work for you.
Yes, it has a bunch of quirks, like me. ASMR hurts the ears. I mean, like most cameras. But it really is about learning how to navigate those quirks and figuring out how to use them to your advantage, so it won't hinder your creative process.
That's it for me today. I hope you guys learned a thing or two about the Yashica. As always, like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. It really helps the channel to grow. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.